My name is Eric and today I'm staining a fretboard.
As beautiful as this piece of ebony is, it's not really what I'm going for with this build. It doesn't really fit the idea that I have in mind. So I'm going to go ahead and go through, tape it off, stain it. We'll see how it looks. It's a pretty straightforward process. I'm just going to tape it off very carefully. That's probably the back of my head that you're staring at right now. I don't really know how else I could do this without having a shitty camera angle. Now there is just a slight overlap of the tape on top of the fretboard. That is not a problem because there's always going to be a tiny bit of bleed through. And honestly, like worst case scenario, there's a tiny little bit of brown on the side. That's not a problem. Like ebony is rarely purely black anyway, but this is just a little bit too much tan for the look I am going for. Get this last little piece taped off. That is it. Nothing to it. Alright, today I will be using Angelus leather dyes. Shout out to Big D for turning me on to these dyes. They work absolutely fantastic on wood. Really bright, vivid colors. Alcohol based, so they work pretty well with oil or water. I would say the only issue I've ever had with them is sometimes I like to use shellac as my sanding sealer. Unfortunately, shellac is also alcohol based, and so that can move the colors around a little bit, cause some issues. I did do a test piece and had really good results with that test piece, which makes me feel pretty confident this is going to work. Never actually done it before though, so that will be interesting. I don't want it dripping, but I want there to be plenty to soak in. Oh, you know, actually I don't know if they waxed or oiled this. I probably should have de-waxed it with some naphtha or alcohol. I'll just have to hope that as I go, it kind of picks it up and does it for me. Oh yeah, look at that. I'll make sure every little spot gets at least 2 coats, if not more. And I'll come back through and clean the excess off the frets, as well as any extra that might be on the dots there. It's all soaked in and dried pretty good. I don't think this is going to take all the color out. I don't expect it to. Just darken it up a bit. And I want to be fairly careful, although it's not a huge deal with the finish I'm planning on doing on this. If I were to get a tiny bit somewhere, still kind of good practice not to. It's going to darken it up some, but I don't think I'm going to be able to cover up that spot entirely. It's not the worst though. Like I said, I don't mind a little bit of color there. I think I'm going to go ahead and saw a good third pass. I may have to get a new rag here. Right down the sides. At this point the rag is pretty dry, so I'm not really concerned with any kind of bleed through. It's still leaving a little bit of color behind. That's basically it. I'll come back through and clean off the frets, wipe it down. If I absolutely need to, I can come back in with a second coat and even do light sanding with some very high grit sandpaper to clean up the dots if need be. Basically just buffing it really more than sanding it. That will do it. Definitely going to come in with a second coat. This dried a little bit streaky in places. I'm not satisfied with it, so I'm going to come back in with a second coat, go a little harder, a little heavier, see if I can really soak it in. This ebony does not seem to want to soak up this dye very much. So we are going to really give it to it. Give it as much as it's willing to drink up. Not as worried about it down here, but there might have been wax or something on this board. Really should have waxed it first. It's pretty darn dark. I'm gonna have a hard time getting that stain to entirely remove. I wonder if that StewMac stuff is actually any better than just regular old black dye. I have never tried it. Gotta get it built up and soaked in pretty good. If I do decide to sand it, I don't want too much of the color to come back. Well, that is a heck of a lot darker than it was. We'll see how it goes once it dries and I get it cleaned up and buffed out. I don't think it'll ever be pure black. It's just got too much color gradation. This piece of maple is pretty uniform, so it's relatively easy to get it nice and dark. Okay. Alright, so I've let that mostly dry. I'm pretty happy with the results. At this point, I'm just going to take a dry cloth and I'm just going to kind of rub or buff out any extra that might be sitting on the surface. Of course, it'll come off the metal super easy. And as I go through the build, I'll keep working it over, cleaning it so that there won't be any sort of leftovers to bleed out onto a sweaty hand. I don't think anybody wants any of that business. Scrub, 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 scrub. And there's a little bit coming off, but as much as you might think. Because it's alcohol based, it looks in there pretty good, I think. Yeah, I definitely was not able to eliminate that eye completely. It doesn't really rub off. I think that's basically it. Should I do a third coat or not? At this point, I don't know that it's really going to get in there that much more. It's already a lot of dye I just put on it. I have to think about it, but I'm leaning towards no. It got it a lot darker. It isn't quite so obviously, what do they call it? Pale moon ebony. Basically ebony with mixtures of light tan and dark. Yeah, I could probably live with that. Alright, so I have decided to go ahead and give it a third coat. For the most part, this is looking pretty good, but still that spot there. I'd really like to get that a little bit darker. So, we are going to focus on that area with this application, see if I can't get it darker. I really ought to try that StewMac stuff sometime, see if it's worth the price tag. Yeah, it almost seems like it has a harder time sinking in places as well. Could just be my imagination, or it's just easier to see. Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and give everything another coat. I don't like not doing so. Except the sides, I'm super not worried about those. Well, that actually did pretty good. Yeah, I'm glad I decided to go that route. That extra definitely seems to be helping. I'll keep applying to that same trouble spot. I get the results that I am looking for. Cool. Really think that got it. So now I'll just wipe it down once it's dry. Give it a nice dry buff. Should be good to go. Sweet. This is set for a couple days because work has been rather busy lately. Now I'm going to hit it with some finishing oil, which if any of the dye is going to come up, it's going to do it now while I'm applying this oil. And this will also help kind of soak the dye that doesn't come up into the wood a little bit better. Nice even coat. Also might help if the alcohol dried the wood out a little bit. I don't think that's a big potential issue, but I guess it's there. It did pull up a little, but really not that much. For the most part, once that dye is in there, it's not going anywhere. Not unless you hit it with a sander or just straight up alcohol. I will give this a moment to sit, and I'll go back over it and just kind of wipe the extra off. Normally I'd use a microfiber cloth, but since I was pulling some extra stuff out, you might as well use a paper towel. That's pretty much it for the fretboard. It doesn't completely hide that spot, which is actually pretty disappointing. If I have time, I might have to consider making my own neck. Now I'm going to move on to the body.